I was born September 12th of 1931, right at the heart of the Depression. And my dad was just a working stiff in a warehouse, a hardware warehouse, and Mom had a lot of problems, health problems. And then my older brother was 16 months older, so we were raised almost like twins. Whatever they bought at Montgomery Ward's for him, a shirt and pants, I got the same thing. Shoes, same thing. And she had some serious health problems, and then my brother was born right at the end of at the middle of the Depression at 38, and then my young brother was born in 43. So there was a long span, but it covered from one end to the other as far as the Depression, and it was tough. I can remember a lot of times at Christmas and Thanksgiving, if my dad wasn't given a venison roast, we wouldn't have had meat on the table for Thanksgiving. And Grandma, his parents, raised 9 kids and a little farm out in Afton. And Grandma used to provide us with eggs, 13 eggs in a Carol can. And she'd probably give us a chicken for Thanksgiving until the war years, before we could afford to put a big meal on the table. Now, so it was really kind of a tough life, and with the Depression, you'll find this true from all the guys you talk to. It was a tough go, and a lot of them enlisted in the military just to get away to get some social life and some money in their pockets. But I didn't do that. My dad and mother provided the home for us. It wasn't much. It was stove heat, but it was home. And we lived there till 1950, and but my mother's father had passed away, and left some money to her. And between my dad had saved buying war bonds, we bought a house. He bought a house in the Hazel Park area, which was really an upcoming. It was really a nice house, and we finally had a bathroom and a bathtub. And, we lived there, and he didn't want us to pay him rent, pay him board and room. But, if you get a little guilty complex, if you're out probably having a few beers and you're not paying anything at home, you kind of say, hey, I feel sorry for Dad. So we started paying him board and room. And then when he bought that house, he needed $800. So my brother and I told him we would guarantee we'd pay him enough to pay off that loan in a year. We had a neighbor that come over to his house, and he said, are you short? Are you short on money? And he said, well, I need $800. I need $800. He said, you don't need it, I got it for you. So the neighbor guy loaned him $800, and we paid him off. And then after that, after I went in the Army and I come home, I was paying him $40 a month, which is $10 a week. That hardly pays for the laundry bill, But then I got married in '56, and he'd come to me in the spring after I bought my wife the diamond rings and a set. And he says to me, you don't have to pay me any board and room. Save it. You'll need it when you get married. So I didn't pay him that whole summer, and I saved the money. So when we had the reception, we had one reception at her house, one reception at my house. Her being of the nature of her father being senior elder in the church group they belonged to, didn't believe in any booze. So we had a lemonade and cake reception at her house with all of her relatives, and then all of my friends and her friends and my relatives were at my house. I bought 2 hams and 100 pounds of potatoes. Now, we didn't use that 100 pounds, but I bought them, and we had the reception at my house, and we've lasted 59 years at the Holy Matrimonies,
Had to do something right.
So can you tell me when and where you enlisted?
Well, like I say, it was in March. I think it was a March 4th, 4th or 5th that I went down to the draft board. And I was tired of working nights, and I didn't want to. And you're missing the social life, and you wanted to make a date for Saturday night. You had to go over to the roundhouse where there's about 10 guys sitting there, and you had to call up your girlfriend or the date you wanted. And you had to make it in the middle of the week, and you're working 3 to 11. And so I went down there on the draft board, and I said to the woman at the train station is where the draft boards were. And I went in there, and she said, "What can I do for you?" And I said, "Well, I want to know when my number would be coming up, you think, for the draft." She said, "Well, what's your name?" And she looked it up, said, "Well, it would probably be like September of this 1952. And I said, "When's the next group going?" And she said, the 25th of March. I said, "Can I get on that list?" And she opened the desk drawer and took out that long form with the stamp, and she put on her volunteer. And I thought, oh my God, did I step on it now? But that was a better move, because I got in, I left the 25th of March, went to Sheridan, Illinois, and basic training in Fort Riley, Kansas. And they screened me to be a bandsman because I was a drummer in a drum and bugle corps. And that was filled up. I had a friend of mine that was in the 10th Division band down there, and he was a real good drummer. And he tried to help me get into the 10th Division band, but it was full. So I didn't know till the day I graduated from basic training that I was going to be sent to food service school at Riley, Kansas. And that was a good school. There was only about 35 in the class, and we had 3 master sergeants that taught us. And I went through there, and you made it known that you want to do the best you can, and they helped you, and they helped you, get those grades. I think I had about a 96 point average for going to school, and I was a graduate. I won a set of knives and $100 savings bond, and I still got that picture hanging above my dresser. A guy by the name of Lieutenant Colonel Alex Polinek was standing there shaking my hand when I was the honor graduate. Then I got to ship the orders to Korea, and I didn't understand what FECOM meant on the top of those orders, so I went down and talked to a recruiter, and he said, "Oh, you're in the Air Force." And I said, "No, I'm in the Army." He said, "Well, you're in the Air Force now." So when I got to Korea, then the 931st Engineering Aviation Battalion, or group, the headquarters, and then the story went that I met the company commander the next day and told him I had gone to Dunwoody, and the company clerk was from Minneapolis, and he said it was a hell of a school, and he said to me, "You got a job." So I went over there, and I didn't know that it was his birthday in about a week and a half. So the mess sergeant told me it was the company commander's birthday, so I said, have you got some pie plates and pie tins? And he said, "Yeah, I got about a half a dozen." So I made him a cake with about a half a dozen layers and icing between them, and I even made some cocoa into the white icing, and I made a bag, and I put "Happy Birthday." And so I really kind of greased his palm when I got in there. I had a good deal, and I worked 7 days a week, but it wasn't hard work. I'd have to start about 7 in the morning, and you would have a sit-down time because when you're waiting for the bread to rise, So, you'd sit down and be able to read, and then make the supper hour, and I didn't have to clean up anything, and I didn't have to get ready for the next day. It was all there, so I really scrounged. I traded a lot of stuff. What I did, lard is the better vehicle than Crisco because that's vegetable shortening. Lard is really what makes the bread chewy. And I went down to the British and traded off Crisco. They liked that with the frying, and I traded that off for baking powder and lard. and that I used the lard strictly for the bread making. And I had a storage room full of supplies, and I really enjoyed my job. I sent home, and my mother sent me the books I had at Dunwoody, and I used recipes out of there that the Army never heard of. But that many guys, 150, that's just like a banquet or a open house. So it was really educational for me. Why I never went to food service school? Because I wanted to play when the people were playing. I didn't want to be working when they were playing. So I went to accounting, and that's what I did for 20 years after I started that job in '54 and left there in '73. Went back to the newspaper, and that's what I made a living, and I made a good living. Now that trade is burnt up. It's gone. It's not there anymore. So I did do well with what I had, and I'm satisfied. I just think that if I can live a life without illness to any great extent, my life is successful. I do have a will, and I got some plans, and that's I hope that my family fulfills them.
Can you tell me when and where did you arrive in Korea?
Well, we were aboard we shipped aboard the USS Menard, which is a transport, and we went into Yokohama, Japan, and we were there at Yokohama. We loaded on a train and went the distance down to South Japan to Yokosuka, Iwakuni Air Base, which was also the naval base for the Japanese people during World War II. And when we got off the train that morning, they took us into this big courtyard, and it says right up there on a big sign, with a bulldog with a boxing glove on, and it says, "Welcome to the 6403rd Personnel Processing Squadron, Gateway to Korea." So we stayed there a night, and then they took us out to the airbase in a big semi with a trailer. They took us out there and to the airbase, and the guy come down, and he was an Australian, and they were flying C-119s, boxcars that were going to Korea, and that's what we flew down there with the harness, parachute harness on at night. We got there about 10 o'clock at night at K-16 in Seoul, which is just outside of Yeongdong-po, and they come down and picked us up in 2.5-ton trucks and hauled us up to the compound, which was up close to Incheon, about halfway between Incheon and Seoul. And then they bedded us down. They give us a sandwich and a cup of coffee and bedded us down. And then the next morning, the clerk come down and said that the old man wanted to talk to me. And from there out, and it was everyday work, but it was enjoyable. And we had like a little city. We had our own post office, our own compound for buy cigarettes and stuff that personal stuff. And you can get off. You could always get a ride. I'll tell you what, when they see you walking, anybody that's driving a military vehicle, you see you walking, they'd give you a ride. You didn't have to stick your thumb out. They'd pick you up and give you a ride, no matter where you're going. They wanted to talk to people from wherever you were. They wanted to get to know you, and that's the way it was. And this friend of mine come over there on Easter Sunday, Palm Sunday of '53, and was stationed down in Yeongdong-po, right in the police department. And the MPs that I called him, and I said to the guy on the phone, I said to him, "I'm looking for Dick Patterson, a guy that come in from Minnesota just recently." He said, "Oh, I think I know who you're talking about. He's a hell of a big guy. He's out working in the motor pool." So I told him where he was, and he and a friend of mine from Redwood Falls come up there that afternoon, and he didn't have any clothes because they were lost or stolen. So I knew the supply sergeant, and he give them shorts and T-shirts and a fatigue uniform. The next day he come back, he said, "Do you want the stuff back?" They raided a off-limits establishment that had stolen the stuff from the government anyway. They just confiscated it and paid us back. So there was a bartering business, and you looked out for each other. That was a big thing. That's one of the big things that you do in there. In life, you do that. So I went on R&R over there to Japan for a week, and bought some china and sent it home, and it was really a nice vacation, and you saw a lot of Japan. We went to the palace. I was with a guy that was from Chicago that was studying political science, and he wanted to know, then the election was coming up, so we went to a lot of dignitaries' assemblies and listened to what they had to say. I don't know what he got out of it, but I got nothing out of it. I couldn't understand it anyway. But it was interesting. Yeah. It was a time of learning, I guess. I come back, and then I went to business college, and I got a degree in accounting, and from there on, it was just one of those things. I made, like I say, I made a good life, a good living, and I can't complain. The GI Bill really helped. Really helped.
So where were you based during your time in Korea?
Well, the little town outside our compound was Oryadong, and it was halfway between Seoul here and Incheon there, on the main supply route between Incheon and Seoul, and it was right off of there. We only had a compound probably about 700-800 feet by about 700-800 feet wide. It was an old trainman's hotel is what we took over. So we had a hard roof over our heads, 2 floors, and we had a plumber, a pipe fitter out of Wisconsin, and a water point man was a geologist out of Utah. So we had the cream of the crop. That's what this commander. Our base commander was a full bird colonel, and that's unusual. That's very, very unusual. But he was an Air Force guy, and he was Colonel Gordon, and he was Jewish. But that's, the higher the rank, the more you get. We had about 30 officers there, and I think that only about 6 or 7 were second lieutenants. So. And those are the grunts out in the field. The rest of the guys had desk jobs, and they were majors, captains, and lieutenant colonels. So we had, and they had their own dining room. This little guy that I referred to there, Donnie Ray, he was the cook for the officers, and that's what he was back there, and he'd take care of their cooks, their needs, and My company commander was a black guy, and one was the one that when I left Korea, this guy lived in down south of Rochester, of Northfield, and he was a graduate from the University of Minnesota, and he wrote me a hell of a letter of recommendation, and. But he was they were all good people. They were all good people. And the black guy, when he was there, he was a first lieutenant, company commander, and he come out to me one night that we had stew for 2-3 weeks straight. That's all, you would have to make different versions of it, but it was still stew. And he come out there, and I was cleaning up in the bake shop, and he said to me, "Sergeant," he says, "you don't have to fulfill my request, but I can't make you do it." He said, "but I'd sure appreciate a couple eggs and toast." So I get the stove out, I get the frying pan out, crack a couple eggs, make a little toast for him. You'd think that I was a savior for him, and that's gratitude. If I needed a pass to go down to see my friend at the MP office, you go up there and he'd be in bed reading. You rap on the door, and he'd say, I'd say Sergeant Swanson, and he'd go and he'd give you a pass anytime you wanted it, you know. So you can earn things, or you can be a clown and be punished, you know. So I tried to do the best I could, and I was just happy to get home, you know. And home was, I got the pictures when I got off the aircraft that day, and I got the little brother was only 9 years old, 10 years old. Yeah, I'll tell you, you know. And Dad took a day of vacation from his job. It was just a great feeling to get home and get your feet on the ground in Minnesota. You know, I really enjoyed it. But I say it's an experience, and it's a good experience. Service is there, and you didn't like going. I tell everybody that I left with 3 other guys, 1 pulling and 2 pushing to go. But I was, you know, I was just one of those guys that I was tired with the civilian life and 20 years old, and you had this hanging over your head, let's do it and get it over with. So I benefited all the way down the line. From everything that I did was good. So I was in the head of the 931st group. We had 3 battalions of laborers that were building airstrips out there. And I was up here with, we had about 150 men in our company. About 20 were officers and about 130 men were enlisted. And they were in engineering departments, surveyors, official photographers, besides the service people that made that company run. So my job was, the commander had a secretary, or he was like a clerk or an office clerk, and when he interviewed me, he said he come down to get me. I was in a waiting area, and he said the old man wants to talk to you. And up there, and I give him a salute. He was a full captain, and he was from Cracking Springs, Virginia. He was part Indian, and he said he had his papers on his desk, and he says, "I see you did quite well in food service school at Riley." And I said, "Yes, sir." And I was the top graduate of my class. And he said, "What'd you do in civilian life?" And I said, I worked in a bakery. I was a baker. He said, "What was your formal education?" Now, the clerk was from Minneapolis, Minnesota. And I said, "I attended Dunwoody Industrial Institute, Minneapolis, Minnesota." He looked over at the clerk, and the clerk said, "A hell of a school." He said, "You got a job." Just like that. So he sent me up to the mess hall that morning, and I got introduced to the sergeant and the mess sergeant and the baker. Tell you what, when they talk about the rolls rolling off the table and killed a pal of mine, that's the way he made bread. They were heavy, thick. My mother taught me all about the bread baking when I was little, you know, and I knew how to make bread. And I made pastry for the coffee call at 10 o'clock in the morning. I took the same pans and made rolls for lunch. And then I took the same pans back and I made pastry for supper 7 days a week. That's what my job was. I could get by with it, you know. I could make all kinds of creative things in the pastry line, but the bread was the big thing. But Ma taught me well. She really did. I could make baking powder biscuits that would stand up like that, and that wasn't very often. That the mess sergeant, because he didn't like the cooks didn't like making that creamed beef or creamed hamburger they didn't like making that, so he wouldn't order it on the menu too often. But I could make baking powder biscuits. I had a guy tell me he was a sergeant, had been in the Army 20 years. He said to me, "My mother, 86-year-old mother back in Old St. Joe, Missouri, can't make better bread than you do." She said, "All I have to do is have 4 of those rolls for lunch with a little jelly or marmalade." I said, "I'm good for the rest of the day." So things like that really make your ego
and then I used to create, I didn't make cake every day. I'd create all kinds of crunch bars and stuff like that. You had cereal. I'd open a lot of those boxes of cereals just and roll them out and make crunch. But I had a Korean kid that was about 20 years old, about my age, and helped me. He couldn't get his hands in anything, but he had his shots and went to the medics every month to get checked out. But he was really a good kid. Now my brother, when he went over there a year later, went up to my outfit that I was in. There's the kid. He got a picture of Moon standing there with 4 or 5 different kinds of bread holding it in his hands. He worked for a British outfit then, and they taught. He had my talent from my teaching him to make bread and rolls, and he had a job. So he was really he was a good kid. But you know what? When you left over there, no use keeping track of him because you probably figure you'd never see him again, and I didn't. So that's one of those things. You never go back to history, and the only guy that I knew over there when I left there was this good friend of mine from home. Dick Patterson, his name was. He was with the military police, and when my brother went over there, he was still there. They put in a 16-month tour in the Army, and I told my brother when he got off the ship in Incheon, they'll get aboard transportation down to Seoul, where they processed them in the personal processings, and I told him when you go across the Han River Bridge, you give the note to the guard and tell him to get to Dick Patterson. That night at 6 o'clock, Dick Patterson come down and arrested him. He said, "How the hell can you be? He only been in the country a couple hours." That's okay. We got to arrest him. So they executed the orders, and they went up there and they had caught the company commander in an off-limits establishment, having a little fun one night, and they went over and talked to him. He was in charge of a communications company, and my brother was a signalman. They said, "We'll make a trade-off. Get this guy in your outfit, we'll forget about that." So my brother, till the day he died, thought that Dick Patterson was God. He was that kind of a guy, that those two guys would get together and cry about their experiences, just being acquainted with each other. Dick died when he was about 55 years old, so he meant a lot to us.
Can you tell me your branch, your division, etc.?
Okay, I was under the 5th Air Force, a 931st Engineering Aviation Group, and we had 3 battalions, construction battalions, the 802nd, the 809th, and the 811th. Now, they were out in the field, and we lengthened the runways at Kimpo, K-14, K-13, K-16, so they could land the big jets there. And matter of fact, we were down to one night. We took a ride down at K-13, which was Suwon, and we saw an aircraft. That was a Marine base, and we saw the aircraft coming in and hit the runway and go into a skid. Didn't have the landing gear down, and hit the fence. And when it hit the fence, the cowl popped open. We saw a guy run from it. Found out a week later that was Ted Williams from the Boston Red Sox that went back there to play for him, and that was him that crash landed on the runway. You didn't know who it was until you read the Stars and Stripes a week later, but that was him. So we had opportunities, those battalions. That was 7 days a week really work. And those guys were the grubbies in the outfit.
But we never had, anything requests would come through headquarters, and then we'd haul it down there if they needed this or that. And you'd go down there, and really there was a little bit of a morale problem, with that working episode 7 days a week, It was, I didn't think that the morale was that good in those battalions, but that was the nature of the beast, You had a guy there, they put a pipeline in from oil, I don't know if it was from Incheon on the sea that would unload these oil tankers or what it was, but this guy was a welder, been in the Army 20 years, and he had mustache that would touch his earlobes. He had wax them. He was really a character. Sergeant Strout, his name was. And he had stories to tell that he'd been there. It was a second tour over there. And the first tour that was fought in the Chosin Reservoir, they had the beating. And they went up. I had breakfast with one of the Marines that walked out of the reservoir. And I've known 3 of them. One of them died in the last year, but Bifunk and Perkins and are still living, and they carried a 3-part mortar out of the reservoir. They walked 50 miles just to avoid it. And I knew a guy that I went to school with, Paul Swanson, got killed there. He was in one semester he was at Hamlin University. The next winter or 2 months later he was in Korea and he got killed. He got killed right about Thanksgiving Day, and that things kind of bite you. You think that you're invincible, but one shot and you're dead. So it's not really. That's why Churchill said war is hell, and he meant it. So I agree with him. It's tough. It's tough. So I guess I don't have much more to say than that, other than I thank you for the opportunity. You're doing a tremendous job. You're trying to promote this to the outside world, I watch everything, and I've watched World War II until I've worn out. I think I got sore feet from walking on the battle of the footsteps of the guys that served. But I was 13, 14 years old when the war was going on, and that's all was in the paper. And you were we'd sit down, my brother and I would go down and get our papers at the same corner, and the D-Day, June 6th of 1944, we sat right down on the curb and snapped the bundle open and read the paper right there. It was just, I got all the clippings, and I've got a lot of stuff that I'm saving from the Korean War. That, who cares today? Nobody cares. Only if you're involved, your family is involved. One of your family members got killed or wounded or something. Now you're involved. But if you're not involved, nobody really cares,
Can you just tell me a bit about your brother who served as well?
Well, he was 16 months older, but he had a bad knee, and he was classified 4F, and they kept, the pool kept getting less and less. So in May of '53, he got drafted, and they classified him. They sent him to Camp Gordon, Georgia, for basic training, and there he got blood poisoning, and they healed that up. And then they sent him to Fort Monmouth, New Jersey, he worked for the telegraph company, and when he went in the Army, they give him 3 MOSs, military occupational specialist numbers. And he went to Fort Monmouth, New Jersey, to a long-term school, but he got pneumonia a couple of times, and the sergeant of his company, the company commander's sergeant, says, well, he said, I'd court-martial you for being a melanderer, which means you're a bum or a screw-off. And but he says, your records show that you got those problems. So and I got home in September of '53. He come home and he got married. And then the next thing you know, he got shipped to Korea. Now he was down to about 9 or 10 months left of his Army time. So he says, there's Ed. So he says, I thought that he would be a little bit casual, and when they asked for your assignment, where you wanted to go serve your time, he suggested Korea, thinking he'd go. They shipped him to Europe. They shipped him to Korea. So he was over there, and he was right where I was, right in Yeongdongpo. And that friend of mine, that Dick Patterson, was kind of his mentor and kept track of him and helped him out. And he served his time there, but he come home, so he in April, so he could be discharged in May of 55, and he served his time, and he was a printer maintainer. Now that's totally gone. You'd have to be a computer technician. So in other words, he got himself and he positioned himself. He ended up as a city maintainer in Minneapolis, and then he became the city of Milwaukee, and he had a staff working for him there, and he covered the whole state of Wisconsin with his technology. So he did well, but those jobs are like service jobs with the telephone company. They don't pay a whole lot of money, but the benefits are good. He got a chance to retire when he was 55 years old. He lived till he was 84, and he still drew that pension, $1,700 a month. So he did well. He did well. And he's got a daughter that's a teacher, and one daughter that's at the police force in Missouri, and one daughter that just come home to work as a pharmacist tech. So he's done well. But the military did a lot for me. I volunteered. Didn't hurt me because I went to Riley, Kansas, which was a clean post. I got to Korea and under the Air Force, and they took good care of you. And I got back without getting wounded or killed. And I got out in 21 months. I went to college. I got a 2-year degree in accounting. I worked for that business for 20 years. I managed it, and then I made money when I went to the trade, and I worked goofy hours, Saturdays, Sundays, holidays, nights, but I made money, and I provided for my family to the point where I think that they're all satisfied. When my daughter and son-in-law got married and they wanted to buy a house, I loaned them $10,000 that I never got back after the divorce. So I figured that's what I was. If I had the money, I wouldn't have. If I didn't have the money, I wouldn't have loaned it to them. But if I had the money, I was going to take care of them. So that's my story of what I did. But everything I did, that volunteerism, and I told those kids at White Bear Lake High School, don't be scared to volunteer. In other words, everybody says don't volunteer for anything, but this is one thing that you give your life a future. You volunteer for what you believe in, and I volunteered for what I believed in, and it paid off. It paid off handsomely to me. So I'm happy with what I've done, and my brother and I both concur that experience of being in the Army and in Korea was a great asset to our lifestyles. And he was a dedicated, he was a commander of VFW post in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and he was a 60-year member in the Masonic Lodge, which teaches you good life and good living. So we're satisfied to serve, and when they play the national anthem, I stand a little taller. And when you see, you go to funerals and you wear your uniform and you salute the deceased, that's somewhat of an accomplishment for you. I had that opportunity to participate in my brother's funeral there in December, and I didn't think I would have my emotions would control
myself. So I had my niece's husband, who's studying to be a preacher, read the eulogy of him, and then he gave it back to me, and then I took it down, I give it to my sister-in-law, and I give her the salute. And then they had the flag folding, and then presented them by the American Legion. And it was really symbolical. You know, you never really know how much you miss those people until till they're gone. And then you sit down and you think about it. Geez, he used to call me every Saturday, and he'd been gone. He moved to Milwaukee in 1970. So that's 40 years, and he used to be in touch with you every week, and and you'd exchange viewpoints. And if there was something that a person passed away here that was a friend, I'd call him, and he'd call me back, and we communicated. But now that he's gone, you realize what that meant to you. And the same thing with these people that lost children, sons and daughters in the military. You can understand why they have a little resentment if they don't believe in what the issue was. And I've come back and read about the issues, and Harry Truman. Everybody blamed Harry Truman for the extra year and being involved, but it wasn't Harry's fault. It was the United Nations, and we were a member of the United Nations. They're the ones that called the shots. We put in 85% of the cost and 85% of the amenities to help that war, and only because we belonged to the United Nations. It wasn't our war. That's why we couldn't declare war. So it's just one of those things that happened, and it's unfortunate. But it made a lot of widows and a lot of cripples. But a lot of people got educated too. So in other words, it didn't really soak in the first time around. But I hope it does, now on this Iraq thing and Somalia, when those battles go on, you don't, you got sympathy for them, but then you don't have sympathy for them. I just saw a picture in my souvenirs that there was two of our buddies went down to Great Lakes in training in 52. And when I got my draft notice, there was 5 of us that got together and went down to Chicago and Great Lakes. So had a picture taken of the 7 of us, 2 left, myself and one other guy. And that other guy I don't think he weighs any more than that. He's just sick. But he went to college. He was a school teacher, but he just couldn't leave the booze alone, and got divorced, and went from pillar to post. And he's lives in an apartment out West 7th Street, but he don't know anybody when you call him up. Who are you? So out of 7 guys, there's 2 left. I'm one of them. So I feel very fortunate. I can't express my sentiments about that, and you asked that question, what do you attribute, or what do you do now? Well, I read a lot of history, war history, and then I read family history, and I trace back a lot of my relatives, and I can sit there and think a lot too. I just sit there in a chair, and I retired when I was about 61 and a half years old. I got an early out from the newspaper. I worked for a company for 20 years, and then the son decided to take over my job, so I was out of job at 41. And I was fortunate. I worked at the newspaper for part-time, and I went back and applied to the union for a job. They accepted me. 20 months later, they elected me as secretary-treasurer of the union, and I held that job for 20 years. And I was a delegate for international conventions 12 times out of that 20 years. And I really devoted all my time. My kids were grown, so I had the time to work on the books and go to meetings, and I held that job for 20 years. So when I retired at 61, I worked on that job till I was 64, and then I retired. And but then again, I couldn't sit. The speed is still there. I sat down to take in. I retired at 64, but then I applied to go work part-time. And under the contract, the retirees come last on the hires. And I worked there till I was 75 years old. Then I retired. I just quit everything. Bought a place in Florida in '99, and I've been going there ever since.